Okay, hello everyone and welcome to SIEPR. This is our first SIEPR event of 2018, so it's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and to welcome some new ones too, including students from my Econ 1 class, which I am teaching this quarter, which has been fun so far. I've been really looking forward for quite some time to today's Associates Meeting, which is featuring Michael Tubbs. And Michael has the great honor and really a big responsibility of being the mayor of his hometown, population 307,000, according to the most recent data, Stockton, California. He's also a Stanford grad, and it's really wonderful to see him back on campus. And today he's going to be talking about reinventing government, something which, now that he is on the front lines of government, is getting quite good at, and he'll talk a bit more about that. Okay. Michael was only 26 years old when he won the mayor's seat in November of 2016, but it's not like he came out of nowhere. He had already been serving on Stockton City Council, representing the district that he grew up in. This may strike you as obvious, but it's still worth stating that he is the youngest elected official in Stockton's history, and one of the youngest elected officials in the country, apparently the youngest ever mayor of a city with a population of 100,000 or more. Am I correct with my statistic? Yes? Okay, yeah, sounds good, yeah. So, so that is an incredible accomplishment. He's also the first African-American to serve as the mayor of Stockton. And his political focus, I did a lot of reading in advance of this, and it's fascinating all that his experiences and what he's up to now, but it's really clearly driven by a deep passion to make his city better. He's implementing policies that are meant to turn the tide against violence and against hard economic times, and Stockton has had some tough times over the last decade or so. It's been through bankruptcy twice. It was hit incredibly hard by the housing crisis. Nearly 80% of the children in Stockton's public schools are eligible for free or reduced price meals at lunch or breakfast. And in 2016, the year that Michael was elected mayor, the city had 49 murders. Violent crime is something that hit very close personally to Michael. A cousin of his was killed at a Halloween party in 2010 when Michael was getting close to wrapping up at Stanford. And I think that played some part in spurring him to want to get in the arena of public service. In 2012, he ran for city council, and he received a $10,000 donation from Oprah Winfrey in order to do so. And when he got on the council, he established an initiative to bolster the health, the safety, and the education and housing needs of the city's most vulnerable residents. By the time he was ready to run for mayor, he earned an endorsement from then President Barack Obama, and soon thereafter, he landed on Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 list in the category of law and policy. As mayor, he's taken some really bold and innovative steps to further his ambitions for improving the city. He recently launched an experimental program that will give lower-income residents about $500 a month, making Stockton one of the first test cases for this universal basic income that we've heard so much about. And the idea is to give certain residents enough money to cover their most basic expenses with no strings attached. And Michael has said it's the kind of program that's intended to help people like his mom who struggled to make ends meet as a cashier while his father was in jail when he was a child. So earlier this month, the city council passed, with his encouragement, another interesting program, an advanced peace program that will mentor and pay suspected violent offenders to walk away from crime by giving them a monthly stipend of somewhere between $300 and $700. He's described the stipend as a way to help stabilize the basic financial needs of those in the program, and the money comes from donations, not from taxpayer dollars. Still, it is a controversial plan that has its detractors, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk a bit about it during our discussion. Before he jumped into politics, Michael was a student here at Stanford. He received a full scholarship and graduated with a master's degree in policy, leadership, and organization studies from the Graduate School of Education, plus a bachelor's degree with honors. He is a Truman Scholar and was a recipient of the university's highest award for students, the Dinkelspiel. Did I pronounce that correctly? And if all of this wasn't accomplishment enough, Michael somehow apparently found the time during his time at Stanford and in the years since. For a social life, he's a recent newlywed, and I want to congratulate him on marrying his Stanford sweetheart, Anna, just this past December. So with that, please let me turn things over to Michael Tubbs.
Thank you. Well, he said all the good stuff. I don't know what's I was hoping you would save the marriage announcement for me. That's the only thing I wanted to announce. So my wife apologized she can't be here today. She's a Gates Scholar at Cambridge, so she had to go back to start her PhD this semester. Well, first, I want to thank you all for having me. Thank you so much, Mark, for the kind introduction. I'm looking forward to the Q&A and you stealing more of my thunder and talking about the great stuff we have going on in Stockton. And I think the timing of this conversation is special to me for two reasons. Number one, we had a very exciting announcement in the city today. That reminded me that just 10 years ago, I remember sitting in the library, Maya Angelou Library in Stockton, doing my college applications. And I had like the Fifth Guide to College, that big green book that lists every college in the world in alphabetical order. And I was in the A still. I was like, all these schools. I looked at the price tags, and I felt a little bit of anxiety. Like, I could apply, I could work hard, I'm gonna do well on my SAT, I've got good grades, but how are we gonna be able to afford this if I do get in? I remember saying a quick prayer and saying, if you help me get in, I'll do my part to help a whole bunch of other people get in. And thanks to a large part of this institution, Stanford, where I was able to go and get 2 degrees for the price of none, as I like to say, I was able to announce yesterday the launching of a program we're calling Stockton Scholars, seeded by a $20 million donation to make it so that every student who wants to go to a 2-year school or a 4-year school or a trade school from Stockton Unified School District, our largest school district, we'll be able to do so. Because we've been talking to the CSU Chancellor's office, we found that's just $1,000 for the vast majority of our students that keep them out. And with that $1,000, we're effectively making tuition and fees free for 90+% of students in our school district. So we just announced that yesterday. And it's very serendipitous to come back to this place today, which gave me the opportunity and really shows that when you invest in just one young person's future, it's the best investment you can make, and you have no idea what the returns will be. So we're all on cloud 9 in Stockton, so if I look a little bit tired, that's why. We spent the last 3 weeks preparing for the announcement. They're going to be raising up to $100 million over the next several years. And the second reason why I'm happy today in terms of, you guys could clap for that too. That's like a good thing to clap for. And the second reason why is that, as you know, Monday, we took a day off, did some service, posted some Facebook statuses about this mythical creature we call Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But in my reflection, I read one of his sermons, his last sermon he did in Memphis, Tennessee, and he said something that I think really encapsulates sort of my passion for local government, my love for policy, where he talked about a very familiar story, the Good Samaritan story. And we all know the story. There was a man who was walking by the side of the road. He was beat up, left for dead. And then a bunch of people came by and saw the man. At first, a Levi came by and said, I'm too holy, I'm on my way to church, I really can't help. And then somebody else came by, but they were running late for a meeting or something. And then finally, a Good Samaritan came by and helped the man. And it's funny because being a first-generation student at Stanford, a Good Samaritan, that was my model of what service looked like. That's what I wanted to be. I thought no matter what I did, whether it's in the private sector or in the public sector, as long as I was helping one person and doing my part, that would be enough. But it was after, as you alluded to, the murder of my cousin, I really began to question that edifice. And Dr. King did the same thing. He has this beautiful line in the speech where he talks about, we spend so much time focused on the good and important deeds of the Good Samaritan that we forgot to question the road. And he talks about how the Jericho road is really conducive to ambushing, that it's in many respects structured for violence. And as Dr. Paul Farmer says, structural violence is this idea of the avoidable impairment of basic human needs, exacerbated by things like poverty and inequity and inequality that makes stats like 49 homicides in a year for a city of 300,000 people. And I share that story because I think I came into Stanford thinking that I would be a good Samaritan, but now I'm really motivated, doggedly determined, and passionate about how do we restructure the road? How do we make it sure that every kid in Stockton has the opportunity, if they choose so, to apply and be competitive for a school like Stanford? Because for many of the students in my schools, living in food deserts, or living in underbanked communities, or living with the impacts of immigration policies that have parents scared and separating families, or living with mass incarceration, or dealing with the effects of trauma. It's not really up to them to work hard and pull themselves by their bootstraps all the time, even though each and every day many of them are. So that reflection for Dr. King was really fitting, I think, for my second year as mayor, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're looking at what are the things we can control, understanding that I can't change the choices people make, that I can't force people to make choices, but I do control policy choices, which I argue actually shape the environment in which people make choices anyway. So we're spending a lot of time reviewing paradigms and thinking really, really closely about not just focusing on the individual acts of violence, but the structured violence that make it so that median income for a household in my city is $44,000 a year for a household, meaning the median income from individuals between $20,000 and $25,000. We're taking a hard look at changing paradigms and really thinking through how is it that we have a school district, and all of our school districts, because we have 4, where 35% of kids graduate and can even apply for CSU or UC. I'm gonna say that again. In the school district, all 4 of them, in the most affluent parts and the most underserved parts, only 35% of our kids can even apply to go to our friends at Berkeley, or go to a CSU Stanislaus, or go to a Sac State, meaning the vast majority of them can't. And in talking with parents and meeting with students, it's not because they don't want to, it's not because they don't choose to, it's that oftentimes the option for a college prep curriculum isn't given to them. That they're given schedules that don't align with A through G requirements, and they don't know until they're on the CSU Mentor website with their 3.5 GPAs and 3.7 GPAs, doing everything we tell them to do, and they're applying, and they say, you don't qualify because you didn't take the classes. So I say all that to say I'm super excited to be mayor in this time in American history. I think in 2016 on election night, everyone else was sad. I was happy because I won, right? I was like, well, more in tomorrow. We're celebrating this thing tonight. But I also think over the past year, it's been an excellent time to have tough conversations about values, about what do we value as a country. Do we really, really, truly believe that all men and women are created equal? Do we really, truly believe that everyone should be given an equal opportunity? Do we really, truly believe that if you work hard and you do everything right, you should get ahead? Do we really, truly believe that wealth should increasingly be concentrated in the hands of the few while the many continue to fall further and further behind? And I think even at a local level in Stockton, it's played out in conversations we're having about municipal golf courses, and conversations we're having around this scholarship program, and conversations we're having about how do we reduce violent crime by investing in those who are most likely to be victims and perpetrators of violent crime. And what's interesting, and I'm gonna sit down and we're gonna do Q&A after this, but what's interesting is that oftentimes in this program Advanced Peace, the conversation has been you're paying criminals. Like, how dare you pay criminals? And the answer has been twofold. Number one, we're paying anyway. That every homicide costs the city and county $500,000. That sounds a lot more than $300 to me. Number two, we're paying in collateral costs, the trauma, the sadness, the brokenness, the retaliation. There's no way to measure the impact that has on the family, on the community, on the neighborhood. But then number three, we're actually not paying criminals. That the idea is that they're in a fellowship, and after 6 months, they qualify to be a fellow. In my last job before mayor, my last 2 jobs before mayors, I was a fellow. I was a fellow here at SIEPR, and I got paid to be a fellow. My job description was to do what fellows do, which is be a fellow, right? And this program operates the same way, but the stipends aren't just given for being a fellow. There's very clear tasks they have to do. So for all intents and purposes, it's a job. They perform a task, they get a stipend. That's kind of the way our capitalist system works, I thought. But last but not least, I'm incredibly hopeful, because I was talking with Marian Wright Elderman not too long ago, and she talked about how she started 50 plus years ago organizing with Dr. King on the Poorest People's Campaign. Then she talked about when she was registering people for Head Start in Mississippi. And then she was telling me how she was the first Black woman to be admitted to the Mississippi State Bar and after Yale Law School. And then she talked about the CHIP battles and battling for special education students. And she said, what we're seeing today, she said, it's not a time to be nihilistic It's not a time to be selfish and be inward drawn. It's not a time to think someone else will figure it out. She said, no, no, no. Her history has taught her that it's time to act and do more. And I said, you're not tired? Because I was tired after my 1 year of mayor. I was like, I'm tired. And she said, she said, it's a privilege to struggle for justice. And I think that's why we're all here. I think that's what SIEPR's mission is really. It's really figuring out how do we continue to push the ball forward, push the envelope forward, understanding that our country's values aren't just going to happen because we wrote them, aren't just going to happen because we pledge them. They're going to happen as we actualize them and have tough conversations. And the last thing, and I'll sit down, is that one of the things we've been struggling with locally is this idea of false equivalencies. So every time I speak, I just want to make it very clear that I do believe some things are good and some things are bad. I don't think everything is a cause for compromise. I won't compromise on some things. Like, for example, I tell people all the time in Stockton that I could be empathetic, but the idea that one group of people is better than another, like white supremacy is bad. It's wrong. There's no compromise. There's no conversation there for me. The idea that kids who are here as children should somehow, because of political moves, should be deported, it's bad. That's not even a political question. And I think as we continue to have these conversations over the next 4 to 8 years, I think we have to be a lot more bold about some things are political and we could debate, but some things are just basic human values and there's no gray area. Some things are right, some things are wrong, and there's not two truths. There's not two sides to everything. That one side is right and one side is wrong. And I think if we don't answer that question now, 30 years from now, at a SIEPR or at Berkeley or at, hopefully, when we get a CSU in Stockton, there'll be a conversation like, how do these people not see that there was a right and there was a wrong, that both sides weren't incredibly equal? So with that, Mark, I turn it back to you.
Okay, I guess you come on. Great, thanks. So was that a pure coincidence that this $20 million thing came out yesterday and you're here today? Or is this an added incentive? I'm going to SIEPR tomorrow. I really want to be out there talking about this great thing.
It looks like we planned everything, but we do a horrible job planning. It just works. So it looks like we planned it, but I didn't know I had this till last week, actually.
So November 2016, you get elected, and you're sort of gearing up, thinking about next steps. How do you get ready? 1,208 employees in Stockton. A lot of issues. There's schools, crime, economic development, immigration, healthcare, all these things. So you're there, just stuff, a lot of stuff going on, right? And Stockton, as you noted, and has had some challenges on multiple fronts. So how do you sort of think about, where do you start?
Well, it's funny because going into November, I said, I know a bunch of people on Hillary's campaign, so I got the in. Anything we need, I got. So now it's been interesting building relationships with HUD and other officials that I didn't think I would need to. So that's been really exciting. Well, I think a lot of it just came from the work we had done for 4 years on city council. And understanding that, number one person can't do everything. That's not an excuse to do nothing. And then also the idea that government can't do everything. That's also not an excuse for government to do nothing. So with those two kind of underpinning values, it's like, where are the three things that'll make the biggest impact that we could set up so when I leave, because I'll be termed out, the work continues. And that was really focusing on violent crime reduction, also because it's visceral and personal. That was looking at how do we make sure that there's some sort of level of support for students, not just when they are seniors in high school, but building a real guardrails on their developmental pathway. So if they do go left or right, there's something there to block them if they choose to get the help. And then also spending a lot of time on telling the story of the city. So it's not just bankrupt, but it's this amazing metropolis that has small town values, but 300,000 people. That's the 8th most diverse metro region in this country. That has more Filipino people outside the Philippines than any place in the country at one point. That's 10% Filipino. That has the oldest Sikh temple in North America, the oldest private charter university west of the Mississippi, the University of the Pacific, that has a great port, and so I thought those three things would be the type of things that really move the needle, even if I don't see the immediate success. But 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we would see some benefits from that.
That's great. And so, as you were on the city council before being the mayor, I'm curious to what extent, as you thought there about where you wanted to concentrate your efforts, your thinking, your research, or what have you, how much of that was motivated by your own personal experience growing up in Stockton for your first 18 years versus the time you spent at Stanford, winning all these awards, taking all these great classes? So give a sense.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know that saying that personal is political?
Yeah.
I really believe that, and that's why I get so upset, because a lot of the stuff is, not everything, but a lot of it is really personal. So I think coming into Stanford, kind of lived experiences with poverty or with incarceration or with things of that sort prompted my research interest. Like, why is this like, how did this become like this? But it was interesting because at Stanford, I had the space and the knowledge and kind of the language to talk about some of the structural arrangements. Because going in, especially when you're like, first when your family go to college, you go to Stanford, like it's a big, like you're the man. Like you worked hard, you pulled yourself by your bootstraps, you did everything right. And if your friends had did everything right too, they would be where you are. So I came in with that attitude. Like I was special because I worked hard. And I did work hard, but there's a lot of people who, tell people all the time, the people who work the hardest are probably paid the least, and at least in my city, like our Uber drivers and our migrant farm workers and folks like that work incredibly hard. Anyway, so being at Stanford and reading about kind of policies and how things were structured and how these weren't acts of God, but acts of government entities and elected officials who were casting votes, I was like, oh, wow. We actually can do everything, but it can be used to kind of create the conditions in which people make choices. So to answer your question, it was a mixture of coming in with these lived experiences, but also these biases that, so what, you could still make it, and then actually reading and learning about why so many people can't, and then figuring out, okay, how do you put those two together and use that to kind of help go back to your town and help govern in a way that just equalizes or create more opportunity for everyone. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so you arrived Stanford September 07?
08.
08, September 08. September 2008, and you arrive and you sort of are taking these classes and you're getting to know people and you're learning about the world. Can you talk a little bit about your journey, how it is that we talked about that one incident that happened with your cousin, but there were other things that influenced your thinking about where you wanted to go after Stanford. All the time, I have my Econ 1 students, my advisees, and a lot of times they're asking, what do I want to do? I can go this route, that route. So can you talk a little bit about how you navigated that and figured out your path?
Well, so in 2008, it's just a different time. So community organizing was like the sexiest thing you could be. So I came in saying I'm be a community organizer, right? Then I entered at Google. And I was like, oh, I'm about to work at Google. They got snacks, you wear what you want, right? Do good stuff.
The snacks are good.
You got 20% time, you can organize on that time. I was really excited about it. And then as a lot of my older friends graduated, they would post pictures on Facebook and Instagram about them being in Paris and stuff. I'm like, how are you doing this? Don't you work? And they said, I'm a consultant. So what does that mean? And they told me that they were able to travel and advise businesses, and if they're not, when they could enjoy the city when they're not working. So I wanted to be a management consultant. I said, that's not evil. I'm traveling. I'm helping leaders. You're thinking. I was like, that's good. You wear suits. That's a good job.
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to be. And then, but even after my cousin was murdered, I still was thinking I would do that for several years, then either donate to causes in Stockton or eventually go back to Stockton when I was like settled and adult. And then my senior year, I had this like 20-year plan mapped out, and everything had to happen the way I mapped it out. And the first one, don't laugh at me, it's really ridiculous. But the first one was I had to be a Rhodes Scholar to go back to Stockton. So I was going to be a Rhodes Scholar. Then that didn't work out, and I was like, I can't go back to Stockton. What am I going to do? I'm not a Rhodes Scholar. I can't be mayor of Stockton. I'm not a Rhodes. Like, who thinks like that? It's weird. So then I was applying for like TFA and Google and everything.
Teach for America.
Teach for America, Google, and everything. But for some reason, nothing felt right. So I would just like not go to interviews. So then my mom was all stressed. Like we sacrificed for 21 years. This is the jackpot. Like wait, like what? Get a job. Like what are you doing? I was like, Mom, I don't want to do it. I don't care what you want to do. Get a job. You went to Stanford. What are you talking about? And I was like, I can't explain it. But you know, she's a mom. She's like, listen, by graduation you have a job. Well, really by Christmas break. But it was Christmas break and I didn't have a job. And she was like, well, what's your plan? And I was like, well, I guess I'll end up working for like an advocacy group and figure it out from there. She's like, Google? And I was like, maybe Google, we'll see, Mom. And then, long story short, there was a report on TV where the mayor at the time was asked about her violence reduction strategy. And with everything going on, she forgot that she had announced 5 months earlier she had a violence reduction strategy. So she actually reported, like, what are you talking about? And I love her, but she was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, you announced at the state of the city you had this plan. She was like, I don't have a plan. And that again, political being personal, I took that very personal. And I said, well, look, what's the worst that can happen? I'll graduate, I'll have 2 degrees from Stanford. If I run and lose, I'll graduate and still have 2 degrees from Stanford. And I have a good interview question, or a good thing to talk about in interviews. Like, talk about the time you failed. Well, one time I ran for city council, and I get you the job every time. So that's why I explained to my mom, like, this is what I'm doing. Then I ended up winning. So then the question was, okay, whoa. How do we govern and make sure that, especially if you have people like Oprah writing you checks, there's like a pressure to do something, right? So then the question was, okay, looking at the council district, looking at some of the structural issues, what are a couple things you can do? So and it's not even answering your question, but in those 4 years I'm really proud of, we were able to do small things that made big differences for people. So we were able to able to open a health clinic in that area that had not had a health clinic within a 4-mile radius, which is problematic because 60% of the people in that particular neighborhood didn't have cars. Right. So they just weren't going to the doctor unless it was like a super emergency. So we opened that, and that took a year of emails and meetings, but it got done. And they said that was fast. And I was like, well, really? Like, this could have been done long. Anyway, the second thing we did, there was a problem liquor store in the district that had...
what liquor store? A what?
A problem liquor store in the district. So it had... Just like there was no food in there, but it was like they said they were selling groceries, but there was literally no food. It was also just a haven for like crime, and there had been like over a decade, about 8 homicides. So it also had a place in the historical memory. And a group of community leaders, when I first was elected, this is what they said, and I quote: "We don't care about Stanford, we don't care about Oprah. We care if you could close this liquor store." And I thought that was going to be easy. It took 3.5 years to close the store. But by the time I was done being city council person, that store was closed, and now we're bringing in a grocer to that part of the town that doesn't have a grocery store. So that was exciting. And the third thing we did was we got a financial credit union to open up in a place that before had just check cashing places. So I think oftentimes we take for granted simple things like having 2 Safeways, secret Safeway and regular Safeway, like right next door to each other, right? When some communities don't have a Safeway within a 10-mile radius, or having all types of financial institutions on campus, where there's some communities where the only financial institution is a check cashing place, where you have to spend 20% interest to cash your check to pay your bills. So I say all that to say, I forgot the question actually, but that was a good story. So I think I added to it.
I enjoyed it. I don't really remember where we went. So you've been now mayor for, I think you said a year and a week?
Year and a week. But 7 years, because they're like dog years, literally. Seriously.
So what's been your sort of biggest surprise so far being the mayor? The mayor, you've got all this power, all these issues, tackle them.
More problems than power, for sure. I think the biggest surprise has been, it's going to be like 5. I'm trying to make it coherent, though. The first being that so I won 70% of the vote. I had been on city council for 4 years before that, won 62% for that. So I came in thinking I had like a mandate to like make change, right? And we're still making it, but it hasn't been easy. And maybe that's just a naivety of youth. I just thought, well, hey, it's a good idea, we're gonna do it. But like there's like this sense of inertia, and there's still a vested interest into this failing status quo, not because it's working, but because it's familiar. and it's safe. And I know how to operate. Even if it's not good, I know how to operate in this terrain versus what if it gets worse, which in some cases it really can't. And also, but what happens if it gets better? So that's been a big surprise, like having to negotiate change. Because I know I talked about all this crazy stuff on the campaign, and everyone was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But now when it's time to do it, it's like, oh, wait a minute.
All right.
I was like, no, look at Facebook, you liked it. Anyway, so that's been one. The second surprise has been just how much leadership matters. I think for a lot of the stuff we're doing, some have required like brain work and writing and thinking, but a lot of it just required being in the room, having some goodwill and asking the right question.
Yeah.
Like for example, for the bank, I just literally said, why is there not a bank in South Stockton? And he said, I've been thinking about that for years. I have a bunch of clients who live in South Stockton who want a bank. I was thinking about doing it before the recession. I'm just going to do it. And then a year later, like it was literally there's time after time after time just by asking the question, why is there not a health clinic here? And that garners people to action. So I think we make leadership and like, in some my policy people probably see it differently. In policy, this like intensive research process, which it is, but the fundamental aspect of it is relational and just how important the relationships I built at Stanford and on city council have been to the stuff we're able to do now. Because even when people disagree with me, or even if things may not align with what people feel they're ideologically predisposed to like or dislike, because they know me, they're like, oh, it's tough, so it's not too crazy. He's not trying to harm us or hurt. I believe in him, even if I don't necessarily understand the idea. So that big surprise, just how central relationships and trust and credibility are. And I would say the third biggest surprise is that, and I learned this more on city council, but when I came in, I thought no one knew what they were doing, and that's why things were bad. But the opposite is true. There's in every institution, there's brilliant, smart people who oftentimes haven't been empowered to do the things necessary to make it better. So kind of, again, the benefits of leadership of kind of lifting those blocks so people can do their best work, and also letting people know it's safe to take risk and to try to do something better, and we don't have to be content with a failing status quo. So those are like the biggest surprises.
So I'm just going to ask another question or two and then open it up for audience Q&A. And I'd love it if the first question was from a student. So, but in terms of, I know you've thought a lot about economic development and sort of things you can do to move the needle in that direction. I think I'm that, but anyway. So things you can move the needle on economic development. Can you talk a bit about what and what sort of things are potentially on the horizon and what you see as the sort of opportunities and challenges on the
We have smart people like you who really help think through the intricate parts. So I've been really focused on just the human capital side and how do we ensure that we have folks who are upskilled or skilled for the jobs that exist now, but also in the future. So we've been spending a lot of time with the University of the Pacific mapping out this idea of a skills gap. The Brookings Institute did a report in 2012 that said the top 100 metro areas, we're 95th in terms of our workers having the skills needed for the jobs that exist. So we've been spending a lot of time mapping out exactly where those emerging industries and trends that will exist, not just in 5 years, but in the next 25 years, and then building out where can people go to get those skills and infusing that into our education systems. So that's been heavier lift than I thought. But
when you say your education, where in the education system does that happen?
We're building out this K through 20 consortium. So the economic development and workforce development stuff is really focused right now on the community college system and the adult education, and the place where folks go to get their GEDs. But we're also having conversations with the school districts about how do we kind of revamp our career technical education, but one that's in line with kind of what the community thinks are going to be our driving industry. So healthcare, ag tech, et cetera. One good thing that's coming out of this tax plan is this idea of these opportunity zones, where certain communities will be giving incentives and advantages for folks who locate their companies there. So I did say something nice, and that's a nice thing that's in there that we're really looking forward to benefiting from. And then a lot of it's also just packaging and storytelling and letting people know that Stockton is even statistically, it's not that much more dangerous in than any real urban city, whether it's San Jose, whether it's Sacramento, whether it's Oakland, right? And you could open a business there and be safe, and that there's nice places to live. They're actually affordable, and that you're only an hour and a half away from San Francisco, but you're also 45 minutes away from the capital.
Right.
That we have a port and the airport and railway system. We're working with a company called Nautilus to come to our port, and they're like a data center that's powered by water. But they're also going to install, like, apparently I don't know anything about this, but I've been told that we're at the crux of like a fiber superhighway right in the city. So really plugging into that and utilizing that. So really looking at making sure we're prepared 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, and not content to just have warehousing jobs, and not content just to be a logistics hub.
Right.
But to really take those for now, but position ourselves for the future is kind of the strategy.
Okay, I guess my last question before I'll open it up has to do, so in doing and gearing up for today's talk, I tried to look into some stats about Stockton, and one number that really stood out to me was the fraction of people in Stockton who are foreign born. It's pretty high. Maybe you can comment a little bit on that, and maybe talk a little bit about what you're hearing from many of the people who are foreign born about the things that are happening on the policy front.
So about a third of our population is foreign born, and another 25% have parents who are foreign born, being the majority of the folks I represent that pay taxes, that go to school, that work hard, that are Americans, are immigrants or are really impacted. So that was supposed to be my answer to the surprise one, I'm sorry. So one of the biggest surprises actually has been the amount of time I've had to spend on immigration issues, which actually aren't in my purview. I have no real power or control, but when people are scared, they go to the mayor. So my first 3 months was spent meeting with activist groups and community groups in our police department, and even with the ICE director 2 times to really figure out, okay, who's being targeted, who's not being targeted, what can I tell the community so they feel that everyone's out to get them. Because this is not something necessarily that it's personal to me because I'm a human and I have feelings, but no one in my family in terms of this policy will be personally affected, but it's still a passion of mine. Just because we did a panel with Dream students, and just hearing them talk about how excited they were about DACA and how they made decisions to go to school and do this, and some of them had kids, and hear them talk about what it took to get here was just heartbreaking. I was like, oh my gosh. So this morning I was on the thread with our police chief in Senator Harris's office about this new edict to target Northern California sanctuary cities, and not because there's any safety concerns, but because it's Northern California sanctuary cities. And folks are scared. Folks have been texting and calling saying, okay, what happens? What do I do? Who's gonna take care of my kids if I get deported? One of my friends texted me and said, I'm mentally prepared to be taken away. It's causing a lot of chaos, and especially in cities like Stockton that are trying to be safe. So number one, we're trying to be safe, which requires cooperation with people, with law enforcement. Number two, the majority of our people are immigrants, our parents are immigrants. Number three, the people most impacted by the crime in the city will then oftentimes be immigrants or have parents who are immigrants. And number four, with this fear, they're not engaging, they're not reporting. So it's hampering our efforts to make the city safe, because the folks who make the city safe need to feel like if they talk to the police department, or even the first 3 months of school year, we saw attendance go down because parents were afraid after kids went to school that somehow it'll be caught up in immigration and ICE. So a lot of it is fear, not actually rooted in what could happen, but just the perception, and just that fear is making it difficult to govern and have conversations that are inclusive of the whole community, and the whole community feels safe coming out and participating. So that's something we've been working really hard on. Don't really have answers, just a lot of meetings and letting people hear and ask questions and touch and talk, and doing our best to continue to hold the fort, make the city safe, and make sure everyone feels they're included.
Okay, that's great. So with that, let me see if we have some questions from the audience. Let's see. It is right Onyi, right? Yeah, Onyi, right here on the front row. Econ 1 student here, right?
Hi, my name is Onyi. I'm also a part of the Phoenix Scholars, which you started while here. So I wanted to ask
Thank
you.
you.
Oh, yeah, thank you actually. Um,
A little bit.
okay, all right. And I wanted to ask, given your experience with the Phoenix Scholars and promoting educational equity through that, how did that influence the Stockton Scholars program?
Awesome. So my sophomore year, I got a group of like 50 undergrads to get trained by the admissions office and to be pro bono admissions counselors for kids throughout the state who probably couldn't afford to have pro bono admission counselors. And since then, I think we've helped over 500 or 600 kids become the first in their families to go to college. And many of those students are now Stanford students and Stanford graduates who just with a little bit of tweaking and help, we did it. So I'm glad it's still going on. That's staying power. So thank you for that. And that experience was helpful because in helping kids apply to college and just hearing their stories, I realized that there's a lot, like, even after they got in, then the conversation we'd have to have with their family about affordability were often tough ones, especially because the majority of kids aren't going to be able to take advantage of the generous financial aid policies of Stanford, Harvard, Yale, et cetera. And for the less than 1% that do, bless them. I'm so thankful for it. But for the vast majority, that's not really reality. So seeing students not go straight to a 4-year or make choices or go to a diploma middle school who may have gave them a full ride, it really gave me empathy for the fact that even for students who are low income, if they're not going to a top 10, 15 school, college is still out of reach in terms of affordability for them and their parents. So yes, all those experiences kind of shape what we're trying to do in Stockton now to make it so if you want to go to trade school, community college, 2 years or 4 years, there's a guaranteed scholarship for you. And that, for most kids, will make the difference. And even if it doesn't make the full difference, it makes it that much more affordable. But it all stems from being literally a sophomore in my dorm room, knocking on my dorm's door, get everybody to volunteer to help 2 kids apply to college.
Yeah, another one over here. Yeah.
First of all, real thank you to doing what you're doing, and I hope your mother's now proud. But that's the way that the question. 2 questions. You referred to one of them related to businesses. I would ask you how you are sending businesses to come to Stockton, and 2, that would be useful.
I'm so jealous of Detroit for a couple of reasons. They hold this place in the American imagination where it's sexy to go to Detroit and invest in Detroit and to do things in Detroit in a way that's not in Stockton. And I think it's because Detroit's the American city and Stockton we are the American city, but everyone doesn't know that yet. But there are lessons in terms of Detroit, especially what they've done with their blighted properties. But I think Detroit's a little bit different because our population, despite the challenges, has been increasing every year. Our county is the fastest growing county in the state because of affordability, while Detroit was dealing with issues of flight. So some of the incentive things that worked for them to bring people back would be a little bit different in Stockton. But in terms of incentives, we've been working and pushing our state legislators in the governor's office to bring back some semblance of redevelopment agencies and things like that. We've been investigating whether I'm going to mess up the acronym, but Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District. It's these new tools the governor gave us this year work for Stockton, so our staff is doing analysis. And we're having a debate right now, and I'm hesitant to say it out loud, but we're having a debate right now as a council as to whether we want to do things case by case in terms of incentives, or if we want to do like a blanket incentive program. So I don't want to reveal where I am on that, but that's kind of the discussion we'll be having because the merits of case by case can be very individually specialized, but the merits of doing something that's blanket, it sends a signal, so everyone knows, versus people having to already be interested. So, but we're going to fight it out, and hopefully by budget time, we have some program in place.
Okay, great. Question right here, Anat. Oh, sorry, you're the furthest person from my microphone. Sorry.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but I'll just ask kind of a couple of related ones. Stanford is known for high tech and sort of going to Google, et cetera. So there's a rumor that the previous president of Stanford told Stanford government group here that there'd be more to go to policy. So that kind of extreme view of it, I'm not sure it's true, but it's going around. Anyway, so the question is, how do you get good people to work in government? And is it local government that's easier to kind of get good people for in cases like yourself versus the federal government or state government? And you said reinventing government, but how do we get good people, thoughtful people to go to government when the incentives are kind of not always there?
That's a great question. Well, I would say I don't know if I wasn't there for the comment, but I know President Hennessy was helpful, at least when I told him I was running for city council in 2012 and making introductions and stuff like that. I'm gonna say two things that are gonna contradict each other, but I hold them both to be true. The first thing, I think, for people who are interested in challenges and interested at doing things at scale, you don't get more scale than government. You're touching everyone. It's challenging and it's difficult. But I think it's the best, and you can probably attest to this yourself, it's probably the best and highest use of brain power, emotional power, all that. So that should be attractive. But it's not fun. Like you get, so I have mild ADD, you have to spend every other Tuesday at 4-hour council meetings, where 2 hours of it is spent by folks, and some folks have valid concerns or incessant comments, but 90% of that time is dominated by people who come every Tuesday. What? Like, why are we still doing this? And I have to sit there for 3 minutes and act like it's new information stuff. So stuff like that I think is really difficult. Or the idea, like, democracy is great, but it's easier to make things happen when you're unilateral, but that's not how democracy works. So you have to work with a team of folks who you didn't elect, who you didn't pick your team, so you inherit a team, and you work with the team, and you try to get them to agree with you when their incentives are to do everything they can to undermine you in some cases. So in that way, I get why people don't do government. So to answer your question, I would say that government doesn't have to be a forever thing. You could do it for 4 years, you could do it for 8 years, you could do it as an elected, but you also do it as a city planning commissioner or a school board member or an advisory. But I do think, if nothing else, this last election cycle has taught us that folks don't feel we need to be involved in our government so we can really understand what's going on. But it's not. The impact is fun, and the impact is getting to meet just the most amazing people in your community or in the nation or in the world doing things. But the day-to-day is not fun. So I guess the answer would be if there was more support structures around folks going into government, so it's not all-consuming, so you can have a private life, so you're not, so you're not always in your microphone. If there was more support for people to get into elected office, I think more people would pursue it. I'm just blabbering now. So I'm gonna try to come up with a coherent answer before I get off the stage.
I mean, one thing that you're in sort of a neat position, just pivoting a bit off of that, in the sense that you're the mayor of a city, and I think that can inspire people here at a place like Stanford to want to get into the arena because they know you or they know your story and they can relate to your story. They may have more confidence that if they go that route, let's say in Stockton or city or state or federal agency where they know someone, that can help them feel more confident that they'll be able to have an impact.
Well,
and I think here at Stanford, there are a lot of people who would love to figure out how they could help you and help Stockton realize its potential.
I have a list, but to the point, I think it's the impact you get to make is awesome, but I just don't want people to go into government thinking it's all roses and rainbows. It's a conflict sport. The name of the game is it's conflict. You're talking about resource allocation. You're talking about billions of dollars of government contracts. It's a blood fight. It's a fight, and If you don't like conflict, I would hate to throw you in the arena, right? So, but if you can handle the conflict, I think it's the most rewarding job. And again, it's not permanent. Like money's not going anywhere. So you can spend a couple years in government as an active duty in service. And I'm glad for the decision I made, but I was a little bit more pessimistic than normal because I don't want people to think it's easy. But I also don't think everyone in Stanford should be in government. I don't think being a Stanford student is a qualification in and of itself of being in government. It's a proxy for intelligence and decision making, but there's probably some people at Foothills Community College that'd be better at government than some of us in this room, despite the fact that we went to Stanford.
Right. Okay. Additional questions? How about right here? Yeah. Right. I'm right here, front. Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering what your largest setback has been as mayor so far, and how you kept pushing through despite that.
Yeah. Well, largest setback. Well, it's interesting. Well, I'm gonna get in trouble, but forgive me. Like, there's like this whole conversation nationally about fake news. I actually have empathy because there's literally like a fake news blog dedicated to like just lying about me every day. It's like sickening. It's like actually terrifying. I'm like, whoa, who has time to think of this? And that's just muddied the water. So anything we do, we have to answer to like 10 people who read some clickbait on Facebook. Like, you're paying people to shoot me. What? Why would I do that? Like what? But literally have to spend hours like explaining to people that's not what we're doing. So that's been just not a setback that we always hurdle over, but it just makes it a lot more difficult. I think I alluded to it earlier, but just a sense of inertia, that being idealistic, I was just like, look at this. This is where we are. This is where we could go. Anything better than the status quo, we're all going to be excited about. No. So the biggest setback has been working with the bureaucratic institutions, again, the buy-in from all necessary people to move forward. And it's been a setback because my argument has always been, well, the status quo isn't working. So give me something that works. If you have a better idea, give it to me. But that's not really a salient argument. It doesn't really work. So that's been just interesting, kind of just bringing people along and saying, hey, it's scary, it's different, it's new, you might lose control, you might lose influence, you might not dictate this particular process, but let's try it. If it doesn't work, we could fix it. And so, but not real setbacks, so we win all the time. It just takes longer to get there.
David and then Olivia.
Michael, I think what you're doing in Stockton is awesome. I think the college scholarships are great, the 2-year scholarships, the technical schools are great. My wife and I are involved in East Palo Alto and doing some of the same things. But I do take issue of some of your opening comments about your words. You kind of compared white supremacy to some of the things that are going on immigration with undocumented children. And even the New Yorker has addressed that there are a lot of complicated issues regarding children and illegal and undocumented people in this country. I'm not a supporter of the Trump administration immigration policy for economic reasons. I think it's broken, but I'm just saying it's not, I don't think comparing it to white supremacy is the right answer.
Well, I'm not sure I was making the comparison, I was making the list, but I would say there's some that would argue it is, especially given the comments around Norway and Africa and how different, like we want people from Norway, we don't want people from Africa and Haiti. There's been many commentators from the Atlantic to the New York Times, et cetera, who have equated those two. But I wasn't making the comparison, I was just listing things that I personally think aren't up for debate for me, that I think are just about inherent values.
Olivia.
Just want to thank you for coming. Hearing about you is definitely something that's made me excited about the idea of going into government.
Do it.
Okay.
But be ready to fight, that's all I'm saying, but do it, please.
All right. So I've been really interested about the experiment with universal basic income in Stockton. And I was just curious a bit more about how that idea got off the ground. I'm currently in a class about the topic about how politically difficult it can be.
Did you go to the talk yesterday?
Yes, I did.
Oh, I'm so mad I missed it. So
it was awesome.
I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
Okay. And then another thing is both how it got started, but also what you see as the future of the project, both in Stockton and expanding, and whether you, like other mayors, have reached out with ideas to replicate the project, or if you see Stockton as a future testing ground for various programs like this.
Well, what's interesting is very serendipitous. So in Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos Our Community, he talked about either a federal job guarantee or universal basic income. I remember reading that and being interested, like what happened to this idea? And then in February, we had like a policy research, like very smart students like you, and we had them, I would just send my random whiteboard questions and be like, give me some stuff on this. So the question was, give me something about poverty reduction that I haven't heard. Like, don't give me like just something new, like go figure it out. And then one guy came back with basic income. And I was like, ooh, I don't think we're gonna be able to do that here. But what's interesting, the group we're working with, the Economic Security Project, they were having the same conversation about using philanthropic dollars to test out the idea as proof of concept, and they were looking for a city to do it. So we're at a conference, and they mentioned it, and I said, and it sounded better than it was, but it was true. I said, we have a team, I said task force, we have a task force exploring the idea of basic income in Stockton. It was basically like two of my policy fellows researching. But they were good, they're smart, they could be a task force if they wanted to. And they're like really exciting, so they ended up coming to Stockton and we spent like 3 months co-creating, but at the other time they were looking for other cities too, trying to ratchet up the pressure. So I started talking about, okay, how do we make this sustainable? So I was really like in the weeds. And then that's how the decision was made for Stockton to be the pilot city, but there was just a conference at Stanford in September I was at that had like the treasurer from St. Louis, the mayor of Huntington, West Virginia. This is like 20 council members from all these different cities and municipalities, like 10 or 20. They're thinking about how do we at least pilot and test this. The state rep from Hawaii, how to pilot and test this idea. And I think what's exciting for me is that twofold. It's a conversation about kind of poverty reduction, but what's interesting is that we've been saying universal, meaning you and me. But the conversation always reverts back to poor people. So that's been a very interesting conversation we've been having, because I'm in Stockton, I'm like, well, look, you guys, it's gonna be universal, so the richest person and the poorest person will have equal chance to get one of these 100 slots. But still, the conversation has been, they don't deserve it. Like, you? Universal means you, are you part of that they? So that's been, as a nerd and as a provocateur, it's been very fascinating. To watch this unfold. But Suki Sarma, who's just graduated from Stanford actually in June, is kind of a policy aide, and she's been our lead on that. So if you have any questions, hang out with her. And then we're interviewing now a project director, and we have like the most amazing resumes of people who applied. I'm really excited. So next week we interview the finalists, and then that person will be the person who actually has to figure out all the sticky, interesting things.
Great. We got one more question in the far back. I'm sorry, Trevor. No, behind you. I'm sorry.
Can we do both?
No,
I talk fast.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you guys maybe 2 questions and then answer both. So
Mayor
back.
Tubbs, are you thinking? You mentioned that government could be a temporary sojourn on the way to something else. Are you thinking of higher levels of government? People like Cory Booker of government, from mayor to state legislator to Congress to Senate and so on. Is that part of your plan?
That's a good question. Well,
And Trevor, real quickly, and then Trevor just. Yeah, Trevor, do you want to?
Yeah, we've alluded to a lot of national issues here, and one of the big ones last year was the U.S. withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. A lot of U.S. mayors have...
I signed it too.
What part? Sorry.
I signed the climate. I'm a climate mayor. I'm in.
You're in?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about your vision for Stockton as a climate?
I don't think we got time for that one. He's in though.
I signed it though.
I'm up after. So the senator.
No, well, it's interesting because I'm married now. And because everything's full throttle, I think oftentimes I take too much home, and it's not fair to her. And it definitely won't be fair to like children who did not choose to have a crazy dad who decided to take on the most provocative and testing issues. So I think I'm really married to the idea that whether it's government or not, I do want to continue working on questions around how you create more equality of opportunity for people with the focus on education and criminal justice. So whether that's an elected office or not, I'm not wedded to the fact of being in elected office. And also state, I love my assembly member, but state, I don't think I would do good in state ledge. It's hard. Like I work with 6 council members. I love them dearly, but sometimes I'm like, really? So imagine that with like how many legislators there are. That's just a lot to have egos and too much, all the dinners and stuff. Yeah. No. So to answer your question, I'm open to another office, but I'm also open. I'm open to being open, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And on the question around pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, so we're working. My language is not as sophisticated as I want it to be on this topic. I'm rapidly upskilling and getting more knowledgeable. But we're making sure our new city hall is very eco and green friendly as we're moving to another building. We're looking at sort of moving our city fleets to more hybrid models so they're not using as much CO2. We're looking at solar panels, alternative sources of energy for our city buildings and community centers. And then I have a couple really smart people who majored in green in college, and they're helping kind of formulate what the policy platform is, especially around our general plan. So our general plan, our land use document, we're prioritizing infill and walkability, and we're doing like a master bike plan and more lanes like that. So I'm doing my best, man.
With that, please join me in thanking Michael Tubbs.